He took my best friend to a romantic dinner at the restaurant I bought. The night sparkled with laughter and champagne bubbles as the engagement party reached its peak. A woman stood in the center of the celebration, radiant in a sleek emerald dress that hugged her figure with elegance. She had everything: a promising career, a charming fiancé, and a best friend who had been by her side since childhood. The guests clinked their glasses, offering toasts to the beautiful couple, wishing them a lifetime of happiness. As she glanced at her fiancé, her heart swelled with love and certainty. He was the man she had dreamed of, the man she trusted with her future. Beside her, her best friend grinned, her arm looped through the fiancé's as if she were part of the relationship itself. The woman didn't mind. After all, they had been inseparable since college, and she had always believed in their unshakable bond. She had built her life on hard work, resilience, and trust. A high-ranking executive in a marketing firm, she prided herself on the reputation she had carved out in the industry. While many saw her as cold and unapproachable in business, she knew that at home, she was warm, loving, and devoted to those who mattered. Her fiancé often teased her about her workaholic tendencies, but she knew he admired her ambition. He, on the other hand, had a more relaxed approach to life, charming his way through social circles with effortless ease. Their differences complemented each other, or so she believed. And her best friend, well, she was the vibrant, carefree spirit who had always been her confidant. She never imagined, not even in her worst nightmares, that the two people she cherished most would become the ones to shatter her world. As the evening unfolded, a strange unease settled in her chest. It was subtle at first, a glance exchanged between her fiancé and her best friend, a lingering touch that felt too familiar. She told herself it was nothing. She had always trusted them. She had always believed in the purity of their friendship. But as the night went on, that seed of doubt took root, nagging at the edges of her mind. The warmth of the champagne turned sour on her tongue. Still, she smiled, laughed, and toasted to the future, oblivious to the storm that was about to unravel everything she had built. The wedding plans were in full motion, and she had thrown herself into every detail, ensuring that the day would be as perfect as their love story. Her best friend, as expected, had taken charge of the bridal party, helping her select the dress, the invitations, and even the floral arrangements. Every afternoon, they sat in cozy cafes, flipping through magazines, discussing colors and themes. Her fiancé, ever the charming figure, would drop in occasionally, pretending to feign interest but always kissing her cheek and telling her she was doing an amazing job. The three of them had always been a unit, and she felt lucky to have such a strong support system. But lately, she had noticed something different. Her best friend had started making decisions without consulting her. The venue she had chosen was suddenly too small, and an alternative, one that the fiancé seemed to favor, was suggested instead. A dress fitting had been rescheduled last minute because her best friend had forgotten to inform her. And then there were the little disappearances. Her fiancé would be busy with work, but when she called, his phone would go straight to voicemail. Her best friend would cancel their plans at the last minute, citing exhaustion, yet social media painted a different picture, one where she and the fiancé were at the same events, laughing, drinking, always close. She told herself she was imagining things. It was just wedding stress. Surely, her fiancé and her best friend, the two most important people in her life, wouldn't betray her. It was absurd. She had spent years with these people. They were her family. The doubts were merely a product of overthinking, of letting paranoia seep into her mind. She brushed the thoughts away and focused on what truly mattered: the wedding, the future, the happiness she had fought so hard to achieve. The first real crack appeared on a Thursday evening. She had left work early, deciding to surprise her fiancé with dinner at his apartment. It had been a while since they had spent an evening alone, and she missed him. Carrying his favorite takeout in her hands, she approached his building, excitement fluttering in her chest. But as she stepped into the lobby, something froze her in place. Standing by the elevator, her best friend was there, laughing softly as she touched his arm. Her fiancé leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her smile. For a moment, she couldn't move. The air in the room seemed to thin, pressing down on her chest. It wasn't just a friendly interaction. There was intimacy in the way their bodies leaned toward each other, in the way his fingers brushed against her best friend's wrist. A private, shared moment she wasn't supposed to witness. Before she could think, the elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside together. She watched as the doors slid shut, taking them away, sealing the scene like a cruel punctuation to a sentence she didn't want to read. Her fingers clenched around the paper bag, her appetite vanishing. She could have followed them. She could have called his phone and confronted them right there. But she didn't. Instead, she turned around, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and walked out. That night, she stared at the ceiling of her bedroom, sleep evading her. She told herself it wasn't what it looked like. It couldn't be. But deep down, something inside her had already started to break. Days passed, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. She started noticing things she had previously ignored, the way her best friend avoided her gaze, the way her fiancé suddenly seemed too busy to talk. Conversations felt forced, strained, as if they were all dancing around an unspoken truth. She found herself becoming hyper-aware of every interaction, every casual touch exchanged between them. Was it always this way, and she had just been too blind to see? Or had something changed? Her suspicions were confirmed when she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. She had been at a boutique, picking up a tailored suit for her fiancé, when she heard two women whispering near the dressing rooms. They mentioned her best friend's name, laughing in hushed tones. "She's been sneaking around with that guy for months," one of them said. "I can't believe his fiancé doesn't know." Her stomach twisted violently. She walked out of the store in a daze, the suit forgotten. It was real. It wasn't just paranoia. They were having an affair. The betrayal struck her like a physical wound, robbing her of breath. But instead of confronting them, she did something else, something even she didn't fully understand at the time. She decided to follow them. It wasn't difficult to track them down. Her best friend had always been fond of posting on social media, and her fiancé was predictable in his habits. That Friday night, she saw a tagged location pop up, a high-end restaurant known for its romantic ambience. Her heart pounded in her chest as she drove there, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. When she arrived, she didn't hesitate. She stepped inside, the soft glow of chandeliers illuminating the intimate setting. And there they were. Her fiancé and her best friend, sitting at a corner table, sipping wine, their fingers grazing as they reached for the same menu. Her world tilted. The room blurred. And then, she did something that none of them expected. She walked forward, calm, collected, and took a seat at their table. Her fiancé choked on his wine. Her best friend went pale. And in a voice so steady it scared even her, she smiled and asked, "Enjoying your meal?" The table was silent, except for the faint clinking of silverware against porcelain. Her fiancé had turned ghostly pale, his grip tightening around his wine glass as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Her best friend, usually so confident, looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the linen napkin on her lap. The woman sitting across from them, the one they had betrayed, didn't waver. She sat with an eerie calm, her hands folded neatly as she studied their expressions. The weight of the moment pressed down on them all, thick and suffocating. "Well," she said, breaking the silence. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your date?" Her voice was steady, but underneath, a storm brewed. Her fiancé swallowed hard, trying to summon the charm that once had her fooled, but there was no escaping this. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, his voice lacking conviction. Her best friend let out a nervous laugh, but even that sounded hollow. "Come on," she said, forcing a smile, "we're just having dinner." The woman leaned back, her lips curving slightly, not in amusement, but in something colder. "Oh, I see," she murmured. "Just dinner. Just like those late-night calls, just like those weekends you both conveniently disappeared." Her words cut through the air like a blade, leaving no room for denial. And then, as if the final nail had been hammered into her own coffin, her best friend whispered, "I never meant for you to find out like this." The words lingered between them, heavy and irreversible. A couple at a nearby table glanced over, sensing the tension, while a waiter hesitated mid-step, unsure whether to interrupt. The woman let out a slow breath, nodding to herself. There it was. The truth, slipping from her best friend's lips, confirming what she already knew deep down. The betrayal wasn't an accident, wasn't a misunderstanding. It had been deliberate, carried out in hushed conversations and stolen moments. And now, it was on display for all to see. Her fiancé reached for her hand, desperation creeping into his voice. "Listen, I love you. This doesn't change that." His words made her stomach turn. Love? Love wasn't deceit, wasn't whispered lies, wasn't a romantic dinner with someone else while planning a wedding with her. She pulled her hand back sharply, and the motion drew attention. Murmurs rippled through the restaurant, heads turning. The humiliation burned through her, but she refused to let them see her crumble. Instead, she pushed her chair back, stood tall, and with a voice that didn't shake, she spoke clearly. "You two deserve each other," she said. "Enjoy your meal." And then she turned and walked away, leaving them in the mess they had created. The moment she stepped outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. Her legs carried her forward, but the weight in her chest grew heavier with every step. Her breath came in sharp gasps, the world around her blurring. She had held herself together inside the restaurant, had refused to let them see her shatter, but now, it was unraveling. The betrayal clung to her like a suffocating cloak, her mind replaying the scene over and over. Their faces, their whispers, the years she had spent loving a man who never truly loved her. She barely made it to her car before her vision swam. The dizziness came fast, a rush of nausea and overwhelming grief. She clutched the car door for support, but her knees buckled beneath her. A passerby stopped, concern flashing in their eyes. "Miss? Are you all right?" The words barely registered. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the love she had lost, pressed down until darkness crept into the edges of her vision. And then, everything faded. The days that followed felt like a cruel joke, a never-ending loop of agony. She couldn't bring herself to return to work, not when her phone buzzed constantly with messages she refused to read. Friends who had once admired her relationship now whispered behind her back, the news of the betrayal spreading like wildfire. Her fiancé, no, her ex, had tried calling, leaving voicemails dripping with false remorse. And her best friend? Silent. Not a word, not an apology. Perhaps there was nothing left to say. She stopped eating, stopped answering calls, stopped caring. The world outside moved on, but she remained frozen, trapped in the wreckage of what was once her life. Her job, the career she had built so meticulously, became an afterthought. Meetings passed without her, deadlines slipped. Eventually, an email arrived HR, informing her of an indefinite leave of absence. The woman she once was, confident and unstoppable, had vanished. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she'd ever find her way back. It was a call she almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, and she had long stopped expecting anything good from her phone. But something made her pick up, and the voice on the other end was both distant and familiar. "I'm sorry for your loss," the woman said. It took her a moment to understand. An old relative, someone she had barely kept in touch with, had passed away. "She left something to you," the voice continued. "An inheritance." The words barely registered. Money, property, none of it mattered anymore. But then, the details came through. An old restaurant. A place once beloved, now abandoned. A sinking ship in need of revival. She almost laughed at the irony. The last place she had seen him, the place where her world fell apart, and now, the universe was offering her one of her own. She should have said no, should have walked away. But something inside her stirred. A spark, buried under months of grief. Maybe, just maybe, this was a way forward. She stood outside the building, staring at the faded letters of the old restaurant's name. The once vibrant sign hung crookedly, the glass windows clouded with dust and neglect. It was nothing like the elegant venue where her world had shattered, yet something about it stirred an unfamiliar feeling in her chest. At first, she had considered selling it. What use did she have for a failing restaurant? But then, a thought crept in, slow and insidious. What if she didn't sell? What if she turned this place into something remarkable? Something that would make them regret ever underestimating her? The idea of rebuilding, of creating something entirely her own, planted itself deep in her mind. For the first time in months, she felt something other than pain. She spent the next few days reviewing the finances, the state of the property, and the work it would take to bring it back to life. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to rise, to prove to herself that she was more than just the woman they had betrayed. She pictured the space transformed, filled with life, elegance, and an energy that would make it undeniable. And then, the final, delicious thought, what if, one day, he and her former best friend walked through those doors, completely unaware of who was behind it all? The image sent a thrill through her. This wouldn't just be a restaurant. It would be her revenge. Rebuilding wasn't easy. The restaurant had been neglected for too long, cracked tiles, broken appliances, a dining area that smelled of dust and forgotten memories. But she refused to be deterred. She threw herself into the work, studying the industry, hiring experts, and making calls to suppliers. Every decision was meticulous, from the lighting that would set the perfect ambience to the wine selection that would rival any five-star establishment. She refused to do anything halfway. If this was going to work, it had to be extraordinary. The hardest part wasn't the renovations, the staffing, or the endless financial calculations, it was believing in herself again. There were days she doubted, when the weight of the past pressed against her like a leaden force. But then, she would remember their faces at that table, the humiliation she had swallowed, and the fire inside her would reignite. She wasn't that broken woman anymore. She was rebuilding, not just a restaurant, but herself. And for the first time, she wasn't waiting for someone else to save her. Opening a restaurant wasn't just about aesthetics. It was contracts, permits, endless negotiations with stubborn suppliers, and staff who needed constant direction. She learned that chefs could be temperamental, that waitstaff needed to be trained with precision, and that one miscalculation in budgeting could send everything into chaos. There were nights she barely slept, poring over expenses, making adjustments, ensuring that every dollar spent was accounted for. The stress was overwhelming, but she had no intention of giving up. Then came the skepticism. Investors who scoffed at her, landlords who hesitated to trust someone with no restaurant experience. "Are you sure you want to take this on?" they'd ask, doubt dripping from their words. She met every doubtful gaze with unwavering determination. She didn't need their approval. She had something far stronger, an iron will, fueled by the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her. And every time she faced a challenge, she reminded herself, she wasn't just opening a restaurant. She was proving them all wrong. It was during one of her more frustrating days, arguing with a vendor over delivery schedules, that she met him. He was tall, with sharp, observant eyes and an air of quiet confidence. He had come in response to one of her job postings, looking to join the kitchen staff. His resume was impressive: experience in high-end restaurants, expertise in French and Italian cuisine. But it wasn't just his skills that caught her attention. It was the way he looked at the space, the way he spoke about food, with the same passion she now carried for this project. "I want to build something," he said, watching her carefully. "Not just cook. I want to be part of something great." His words struck a chord. She knew that feeling, the hunger to create, to prove something to the world. She hired him on the spot, and from that moment, he became her right hand in the kitchen. He taught her the language of flavors, the delicate balance of ingredients, the rhythm of a well-run service. He didn't just believe in the restaurant. He believed in her. And without realizing it, she began to believe in herself again. The night had arrived. The restaurant, once a forgotten relic, now stood as a masterpiece: warm golden lighting, sleek yet inviting decor, tables elegantly set with pristine linens. The scent of carefully curated dishes filled the air, a tantalizing promise of what was to come. She had spent months obsessing over every detail, ensuring that everything would be perfect. And now, as the doors opened and the first wave of guests entered, a thrill of satisfaction coursed through her. Every seat was filled, conversations hummed, and the kitchen moved like a well-oiled machine. She watched from a distance as the first plates left the pass, beautifully arranged, met with eager anticipation. Then, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "It's beautiful," he said, the chef, standing beside her. His admiration was sincere, but there was something else in his gaze, something that made her chest tighten. "You built this." She let his words sink in, her grip tightening on the champagne glass in her hand. She had built this. And this was only the beginning. The success of the grand opening wasn't just luck, it was proof of everything she had fought for. Within weeks, reservations flooded in, critics praised the menu, and the city's elite whispered about the newest culinary gem. She watched as the restaurant became exactly what she had envisioned: exclusive, elegant, and untouchable. The same people who once dismissed her as just another heartbroken woman now spoke her name with admiration. She had gone from forgotten fiancé to a powerful name in the industry, and the taste of that victory was sweeter than any revenge she could have imagined. But power came with its own challenges. Competitors tried to poach her staff, suppliers tested her patience with price hikes, and maintaining the restaurant's reputation required constant effort. Yet, through every challenge, she thrived. The restaurant wasn't just about business, it was about proving, every single day, that she had rebuilt herself from the ruins they had left behind. And in the process, she had become something entirely new, untouchable, unstoppable. They had broken her once, but now, she was stronger than ever. Amidst the whirlwind of success, something unexpected crept in, something softer, unfamiliar. The chef who had stood by her from the beginning had become more than just a business partner. He was the one she trusted, the one who stayed late with her going over menus, the one who instinctively knew when she needed silence or when she needed to be reminded of her own strength. It wasn't just his talent in the kitchen, it was the way he saw her, the way he never treated her as fragile or broken. She had sworn off love, convinced it was nothing more than a beautifully crafted lie. And yet, when he looked at her with something unspoken in his gaze, something that wasn't pity or admiration but something deeper, she found herself hesitating. Could she let herself feel again? Could she allow someone close enough to hurt her? The thought terrified her. So she did what she always did, she pushed it down, buried it beneath late nights and long hours. Because love was a risk she wasn't ready to take. She hadn't thought about him in months, not truly. He had faded into the background of her mind, a scar that no longer ached. But the past had a cruel way of resurfacing when least expected. One evening, as she reviewed the reservation list, a name stood out, sending a chill through her spine. Her ex-fiancé. The man who had shattered her. His name was there, printed neatly, a reservation for two. For a moment, she sat frozen, emotions crashing over her, rage, bitterness, and something else. Amusement. Had he truly walked into her restaurant without realizing who owned it? Had he not heard her name whispered in the industry, not seen the articles praising the woman who had risen from her own destruction? She could have canceled the reservation, could have had him turned away at the door. But something inside her told her to wait. Let him come. Let him sit where she once sat, oblivious to the reckoning that awaited him. The night arrived, and she watched from the shadows as he entered, oblivious, charming as ever. And then, there was his guest, her former best friend. It was almost too perfect. They laughed, they toasted, completely unaware of the stage they had walked onto. She let them enjoy their illusion for a while, watching as they indulged in the luxury she had created. And then, when the moment was right, she stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, drawing their attention like a slow, deliberate drum roll. Their eyes met hers, and in an instant, she saw it, the recognition, the horror, the realization. Her best friend paled, her ex-fiancé stiffened. "Enjoying your meal?" she asked, her voice smooth, almost teasing. The silence at their table was deafening. For the first time, they were the ones left speechless, powerless. And she? She had never felt more in control. She could have walked away then, left them drowning in their own humiliation. But no, this moment deserved more. With the elegance she had mastered, she took a seat at their table, the air around them thick with tension. "I see you have good taste," she mused, letting her gaze sweep over the restaurant. "This place is quite special to me." Her ex-fiancé cleared his throat, trying to gather himself. I didn't know you owned this." His voice was shaky, uncertain. "Oh, I do," she confirmed, tilting her head. "Strange, isn't it? How life brings us back to where we started." Her former best friend swallowed hard, fingers gripping the edge of the table. There was no escaping this, no rewriting the past. She was no longer the woman they had pitied, the woman they had betrayed. She was the one in control now. And as she called the waiter over, a slow smile spread across her lips. "Shall I recommend the dessert? It's the best thing I've ever created." The tension at the table was suffocating, an invisible weight pressing down on them. Her ex-fiancé sat rigid, his once confident demeanor faltering under her gaze. Her former best friend barely breathed, her hands gripping the stem of her wine glass as if it were the only thing grounding her. They had walked into this restaurant thinking they were indulging in a luxurious evening, unaware that they had stepped onto a stage where she was the director, the puppeteer pulling every string. She leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. "You should try the house special," she said smoothly, signaling to the waiter. "It's a personal favorite." The waiter, oblivious to the storm brewing at the table, nodded and disappeared. Her ex-fiancé forced a chuckle, trying to reclaim some control. "I have to admit, I didn't expect to see you here." She tilted her head. "Oh. And why is that? Did you assume I'd still be crying over you?" Her voice was light, almost amused, but the undertone was razor-sharp. His silence was answer enough. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversation and the clinking of cutlery, but at their table, silence reigned. She let it stretch, savoring the discomfort radiating from them. "You look different," her ex-fiancé finally said, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. And in a way, he was. She was no longer the woman who had sat at a table, blindsided and broken. She was no longer the one left behind. She had built something greater than they could ever touch. Her former best friend cleared her throat, attempting to steady her voice. "This place, it's incredible." There was something hesitant in her tone, as if she wasn't sure whether to flatter or fear her. "You've really made something special." The woman who once trusted them smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "I have. And isn't it funny? You two are sitting in something you never thought I could create. I wonder, how does it feel?" The question hung in the air, its weight undeniable. Neither of them had an answer. She watched as realization dawned in their eyes. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was deliberate. A carefully laid trap, executed with precision. They were no longer the ones in control, no longer the ones who had the upper hand. Her ex-fiancé shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, I know things ended badly," he began, voice strained. "But I never meant to hurt you." She let out a quiet laugh, low and unamused. "No," she said, setting her glass down. "Then tell me, how exactly does betrayal feel when you're on the other side of it?" His mouth opened, then closed. There was no defense, no justification that could erase what he had done. Her former best friend flinched as if the words had physically struck her. "I made a mistake," she whispered. I never wanted to lose you." Something inside her should have cracked at those words, but it didn't. She had already mourned the loss of their friendship, already burned through the pain. What remained now was something colder, sharper. "And yet," she said, tilting her head, "you still did." As if on cue, the waiter returned, placing a beautifully plated dish in front of them. "Enjoy," he said with a polite nod before retreating. She watched as they both stared down at their food, neither touching it. "You know," she mused, her voice casual, "this restaurant has a reputation now. People talk. And tonight, I imagine a lot of people will be talking about the two of you." Her eyes flicked toward the nearby tables, where subtle glances had already been cast in their direction. "I wonder how it feels," she continued, leaning forward, "to be the ones being whispered about." Her ex-fiancé's jaw clenched, his usual arrogance cracking. "You've made your point," he muttered. "Have I?" she countered. "Because I think you're only just beginning to understand." Her former best friend finally looked up, her eyes pleading. "Please," she said softly. "We get it. We were wrong." The words, once so powerful, now meant nothing. They weren't an apology, they were a desperate attempt to escape the discomfort of the moment. And for the first time, she had no intention of granting them mercy. She could have let them go. Could have walked away, left them to wallow in the weight of their own choices. But that wasn't enough. This moment deserved a finale. She signaled the waiter once more, handing him a small, folded piece of paper. He returned minutes later, placing it in front of them. A bill, one far higher than they had anticipated. Her ex-fiancé frowned, unfolding it, his eyes widening. This has to be a mistake," he stammered. "This is outrageous." She rested her chin on her hand, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "Oh, but it's not," she said. "See, the best things in life? They come at a cost. And tonight, you're paying for the privilege of sitting at my table." The color drained from his face. Her former best friend opened her mouth, but no words came. They had dined at her restaurant, basked in the luxury she had built, and now, they would pay for it, just as she had once paid for their betrayal. "Consider it," she said, rising from her chair, a reminder that actions have consequences. And with that, she walked away, leaving them to face the weight of their own choices, just as she once had. Days passed after that fateful dinner, but the echoes of that night followed her like a shadow. She had thought it was over, that she had finally severed every tie binding her to them. But then, a message appeared on her phone, her ex-fiancé. The words were desperate, stumbling over themselves in an attempt to rewrite history. "I made a mistake. I miss you. Please, can we talk?" She stared at the screen, numb, before another message followed. This time, from her former best friend. "I never wanted to hurt you. Can we meet? I need to explain." She should have ignored them. Should have blocked their numbers and moved on without hesitation. But something in her, some lingering ghost of who she used to be, made her hesitate. Against her better judgment, she agreed to meet her former best friend, not out of hope, but out of curiosity. Sitting across from her at a quiet cafe, she watched as guilt twisted the woman's face. "I lost you," she whispered. "And it was the worst mistake of my life." But the words held no power anymore. The apology, the regret, it had come far too late. She walked out of the cafe with a strange sense of finality. The conversation had been empty, filled with all the right words but none of the weight to make them matter. There was no undoing what had been done. And for the first time, she felt nothing. No pain, no lingering bitterness, just the quiet realization that she had already moved beyond them. They were relics of a life she no longer lived, echoes of a past she had no desire to revisit. That night, she returned to the restaurant, stepping inside just as the final guests were leaving. The warmth of the place, the scent of her success woven into every detail, wrapped around her like a protective shield. She had built this. She had rebuilt herself. And nothing, not their apologies, not their regrets, could take that away from her. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You okay?" The chef stood by the counter, watching her. She exhaled, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yeah," she said. "I think I finally am." She hadn't planned to see him again, hadn't wanted to. But fate had a way of weaving loose ends into unexpected encounters. It happened on a rainy afternoon, her ex-fiancé, standing outside the restaurant, drenched and looking lost. She could have turned away, could have walked past him without a second thought. Instead, she stopped, tilting her head as she regarded the man who had once meant everything. "You shouldn't be here," she said simply. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I just needed to see you. To say that I don't know what I was thinking back then." His voice cracked, filled with something she didn't recognize. Regret? Defeat? But whatever it was, it didn't move her. He was just a man now. Not a heartbreak, not a wound, just a chapter that had long since ended. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said, turning away. And this time, when she walked away, she felt nothing but freedom. As the months passed, the restaurant flourished, becoming more than she had ever dreamed. But amidst the success, something else had grown, something deeper, something unexpected. The chef had been by her side through every struggle, every triumph. He had seen her at her lowest and had never once looked at her with pity. Instead, he had stood beside her, not trying to fix her, but believing in her. And somewhere along the way, between late-night conversations and stolen glances, she had begun to believe in him, too. It happened one evening, long after the last guest had left. They stood in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the city just beyond the glass. He reached for her hand, hesitant but certain. "I don't want to just build this restaurant with you," he murmured. "I want to build everything with you." Her heart, once so guarded, cracked open just enough to let him in. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe, not just in success, but in love. The past no longer haunted her. It had lost its power, reduced to nothing more than a stepping stone to something greater. She had risen from the ashes of betrayal and humiliation, not just surviving, but thriving. And as she stood in her restaurant, watching as life unfolded around her, she knew she had won. Not because she had sought revenge, but because she had chosen herself. Word had spread, of course. People whispered about her success, about how the woman they had once pitied had built an empire. And perhaps somewhere, her ex and her former best friend still carried the weight of what they had done. But it didn't matter anymore. Because she wasn't looking back. She was only moving forward. And the only thing sweeter than revenge? Living a life so full, so radiant, that the past had no choice but to fade into irrelevance.